Hi, welcome to Something You Should Know, and we do start today with some very practical advice. Advice to help you remember things that you sometimes forget, like names and passwords. And this advice comes from Michael Mosley. He's a MD who writes a regular column for the Daily Mail, and he was a contestant in the World Memory Championships. And his first piece of advice for whatever it is you're trying to memorize, like a password, is to say it out loud, because for some reason, it just helps. Also, test yourself. 15 minutes after you've memorized a password or a name, write it down and say it again. And then 15 minutes later, and then do it again a couple of hours later, and again the following morning. And then it should stick. Sleep and exercise, getting enough of both, are essential to a good memory. And if you're trying to memorize something in depth, like a speech, it helps to create flashcards where you write down key definitions, quotes, and formulas, whatever you need, then use them as reminders to test yourself. And a great way to remember things short term is to use mind maps. An example of how to remember, say, a shopping list of a loaf of bread, a bunch of bananas, and 2 cans of beans, you just create this visual image of a man going into a store, and on his head is a loaf of bread, around his neck is a bunch of bananas, and in each hand he's holding a can of beans. If you imagine that image, it'll be easy to remember that list. And that is something you should know. For many people, breakfast is the easiest meal to skip. You're running late, you grab a cup of coffee, and you don't eat anything. And maybe you even feel good about it because you skipped all those breakfast calories. But research clearly shows that eating a high-protein breakfast can help you eat less during the rest of the day and also help keep body fat from accumulating. There's also evidence that skipping breakfast can take a toll on your mental performance. So if you're too rushed in the morning to grab breakfast, you may want to set the alarm a few minutes earlier to give yourself some time for it. And that is something you should know. First up today, you know how retail stores use psychology to get you to spend more money? Well, did you know that airports do the same thing? At an airport, while the hallways are linoleum, you'll notice that the gate waiting area is carpeted. This is an attempt to make holding areas more relaxing, like your living room. Happy, relaxed passengers spend 7% more money on average on retail items and 10% more on duty-free items. You'll see more and more airport shops with windows to the outside. Passengers tend to walk more into shops that have direct access to sunlight, according to research. In airport lingo, the time between when a passenger clears security and they board the plane is called dwell time. This is when passengers are most likely to spend. Especially crucial is the golden hour. That's the first 60 minutes after you get through security. That's when passengers are in a more self-indulgent mood. Security is a profit killer. One study found that for every 10 minutes a passenger spends in the security line, they spend 30% less on retail items. And shops and restaurants are often clustered to evoke a Main Street feel in the airport because people tend to shop in bustling environments. And that is something you should know. As the weather turns colder, people start bringing firewood into the house because people like to have some logs right near the fire for that first cold, chilly winter night. That's probably a bad idea. Experts say that you should really only take firewood into your house when you're ready to throw it directly onto the fire. See, a lot of creatures take refuge in that firewood, including millipedes, beetles, spiders, and possibly even snakes and mice. They crawl into cracks in the wood or under a piece of loose bark, and they'll settle in. Then, when you bring that wood into the house, they come to life and start exploring the inside of your home. Firewood should be stored outside, preferably on a rack off the ground and away from the house. Keeping it against the house or in a garage gives wood-boring pests easy access to your home. And that is something you should know. First up today, the 40% rule. One thing that Navy SEALs are known for is their mental toughness. And one way they access their mental toughness is with the 40% rule. That rule states that when you think you're done, whatever it is, exercising, working, studying, you're really only 40% done. You can do more. In fact, you can do 60% more. We develop these mental blocks and these patterns over the years that keep us in our comfort zone, but the fact is that you can run farther, you can learn more, you can resist your vices longer. We instinctively know this because when it really counts, we're all able to do it. We tap into that reserve. People do it running marathons or pulling all-nighters for the big test. When it counts, people can do it. The trick is to do it more often, not just in those big moments. And it seems that the more you do it, the more resilient you become, and the more that mental toughness becomes part of who you are. So the next time you feel like giving up, remember you've still got another 60% left. And even if that sounds too much, well, you surely have another 30% left. And that is something you should know. If you send a lot of text messages, you should be aware that adding punctuation to text messages can change how people receive your message. And the general opinion seems to be that when it comes to punctuation in text messages, that less is more. Research published in the journal Computers and Human Behavior showed that when you put just a period at the end of a text message, people perceive it as less sincere than no punctuation at all. On the other hand, an exclamation point at the end makes it seem super sincere. So, in response to an invitation, say, to go to dinner, for example, saying yes and putting a period makes you seem not so sincere and not so interested. Yes, with no punctuation, just the word yes, seems more sincere, and yes with an exclamation mark at the end seems extremely sincere. By the way, this applied only to text punctuation and had little effect on how people perceive the message in handwritten notes. And that is something you should know. Is there really a best seat in the house, in the movie theater? I know people have preferences. Some people like to sit close, some people like to sit back. But is there objectively a best seat in the house? Well, yes, according to the THX Director of Global Technology. While a theater is being built, the sound is calibrated by taking microphone measurements. And while the goal is to make the experience the best for every seat in the house, the closer you can get to where they tested, the better your seat will be. And the seat where the microphones are placed is typically in the center of the row, about 2/3 of the way back from the screen. This is essentially the best seat in the house. If that seat's taken, you're advised to fan out to a center seat closer to the screen. In other words, move forward in the theater, not back. The closer you are, the more you increase your horizontal viewing angle. In other words, the screen fills up your field of vision the closer you get. Of course, you can get too close, and you know that if you've ever had to sit in the front row because all the other seats were sold out, that the front row, it fills up so much of your field of vision that it can be hard to watch. And that is something you should know. While Halloween is the time of year to be scared of lots of things, there are some things that people are afraid of that you shouldn't be. And here are just a couple. For example, that big hairy spider on the wall is going to jump on you. Well, it's not. Spiders don't jump, they crawl, except for one or two species that live in the forest. Spiders are never inclined to come after people. People are often afraid that some crazy person will push them onto the train tracks at a railroad station. Well, in 2009, out of 34 million passenger trips, only 17 people died, including those people who fell on the tracks by accident. A train platform is actually a very safe place to be. People are afraid that they'll be struck by lightning if they carry an umbrella or a smartphone in their hand during a storm. Well, metal does not attract lightning, despite what people think. So if you get struck, it's because you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, but it has nothing to do with what you're holding in your hand. And people are often afraid of elevators. For example, if it bounces when it stops at your floor, people think there's something wrong and it's going to plummet. Well, it won't. Elevators don't fail. There are too many fail-safes in place. And that is something you should know. Hi, and welcome to Something You Should Know. When you meet somebody, what's the first thing you notice? Well, most people, according to research, notice a person's eyes. But what's next? After eyes, what do you notice next? Well, it turns out you notice a person's teeth. According to a study by Kelton Research, not only do we notice a person's teeth, we form subconscious opinions about the person based on their teeth. People with straight teeth are perceived as happier, friendlier, more popular, and more trustworthy than people with crooked teeth. And if you've got crooked teeth, hopefully you have a good complexion, because that is what we notice next, followed by your nose. And that is something you should know. Sometimes it seems that a happy family is one that's always out and about doing things together. But research indicates that family time spent at home is a better predictor for family happiness. Yes, trying new experiences and visiting new places can be great for bonding with your kids, but when researchers at Baylor University surveyed more than 1,500 people about the types of family leisure they'd taken part in the past year, they found that those who stayed home and participated in familiar activities were actually happier than those who had ventured out and been more adventurous. The theory is that when you're out together, you're more focused on the experience and the activity, but being home together is a more structured and predictable environment that allows you to focus on the relationships. And that is something you should know. Hi, welcome to this week's weekend episode of Something You Should Know. And I want to start today by talking about the 27-second effect. And this is really important when it comes to distracted driving. Everyone's been told for a long time now that you shouldn't text and drive, you shouldn't talk on the phone and drive, maybe you shouldn't even eat or drink when you drive because that is distracting you from your driving. Well, research sponsored by the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety shows that the distraction time lasts longer than the distraction itself, up to 27 seconds longer. In other words, you may think it's safe to send that text while you're stopped at a red light, but the mental distraction that you get from composing and typing and sending the text will likely persist even after the light turns green. And that's because it takes your brain time to get back into the game of driving. Now, at 27 seconds, if it takes that long, at 27 seconds, if you're traveling at 25 miles an hour, it would take driving the equivalent of 3 football fields for that distraction to completely dissipate. And they even tested to see if you could improve this over time, and it turns out that you cannot practice away the distraction time. So figure 27 seconds after the distraction is over before you're really back in the game. And that is something you should know. Seems like everybody wishes they had more time in a day to get more things done. Well, a while back, Men's Health magazine put together some time management experts, and here are their top tips that they came up with that will give you more time in your day. And the first thing is to turn off the TV. Every one of these time management experts agreed that this is a huge time waster. If you limit your viewing, you will save hours, not minutes, hours every day. Limit email exposure. Don't stop what you're doing every time a new email pops in. While it would be great to check them once or twice a day, most people just don't have the discipline, but at least make it once every half hour. Make a weekly plan. Any plan is better than no plan at all. If you lay out your week on paper, you'll stay more focused and on task. Get up earlier. Just getting up 15 minutes earlier than usual will give you a huge jumpstart on the day. And finally, make your bed. People who make their bed already have one significant accomplishment done before breakfast, and that starts you on a more disciplined day. We start today talking about dog people. There's really 2 kinds of dog people who let the dog sleep in the bed and dog people who don't. I've never minded having the dog in the bed, but my dog now, Taffy, she doesn't actually like sleeping in the bed. She'll stay on the bed for a little bit, and then she jumps off and sleeps in her own bed. But you've probably heard, if you're a dog person, that there have been several reports that say that letting your dog sleep in bed with you is actually a bad idea for health reasons. But there's one thing you have to know about dog people, and that is that they're unlikely to change the way they treat their dog. So if your dog sleeps in your bed, it's unlikely I'm going to change your mind and convince you to stop doing that. So here instead are some reasons that should make you feel better about letting your dog sleep in the bed. First of all, it can calm you down. It's known that dogs help fight anxiety and depression. Just look at service dogs and pet therapy. Allowing a dog in your bed is a soothing presence that can help you de-stress after a hectic day. It can make you feel safer. There's a reason people have been sleeping around dogs since ancient times. Just the physical presence of a dog around you may help you feel more secure, because if something were to come and sneak up on you, your dog would probably alert you. And it could help you sleep better. Some people swear, and studies have shown, that the rhythmic breathing, heartbeat, and soothing presence of a dog is the best sleep aid around. And that is something you should know. You're probably a very good person, but chances are you're a better person in the morning. You see, you may wake up a good person, but after that, it's just downhill from there. It's known as morning morality in psychological circles. Studies have found that most of us experience our morality peak in the morning. That's the time of day we're least likely to cheat, lie, or cut corners. Then, as the day goes on, distractions tend to desensitize our moral fiber a bit. And when the sun goes down, we're naturally less inhibited, which could trigger immoral behavior. So if you've got a big decision to make, you're more likely to make a more responsible choice around breakfast, but before lunch. And that is something you should know. Hey, welcome to Something You Should Know. Have you ever been so happy that you cried tears of joy? I suspect everybody has, but the whole idea of tears of joy never made sense to one Yale psychologist, because after all, you're supposed to cry when you're sad, not when you're happy. So she decided to look into this, and what she found was really interesting. It seems that people who cry when they're happy are so overwhelmed by the positive emotions that they're feeling, the crying helps to regulate those overpowering emotions. It helps people recover and come back to normal from those strong emotions. And in her research, she found that people are more likely to cry tears of joy at their child's graduation than any other occasion. And that is something you should know. You remember skipping. You skipped when you were a kid. Kids skip all the time, but grown-ups don't. The assumption is that adults don't skip because they don't want to look childish, but scientists have another theory. Skipping just takes too much energy. In fact, skipping uses 24% more power than running the same distance. Still, there is something about skipping, because not only do children do it, but so do lizards and birds and other creatures. And if you want to burn more calories and you don't care what people think, you really should skip. And that is something you should know. Hello, and welcome to our weekend episode this week of Something You Should Know. And I want to start with something I think is really interesting and very appropriate as we head into the holiday season, because it is this time of year when people start to do a lot of cooking, and oftentimes holiday cooking involves alcohol. And I've always heard, and I imagine you've heard this too, that when you cook with alcohol, it burns off. I would guess that 9 out of 10 cooks, if you ask them, would say they believe that. And yet, it turns out to be false. In general, you would have to cook something for 3 hours to get rid of all the alcohol. Of course, it depends on the food and the cooking method and the pan, and there are other factors. But generally speaking, alcohol does not disappear quickly in the cooking process. Many cookbooks say that when cooking a sauce, for example, you simmer it for 20 to 30 seconds to remove the alcohol. But experiments show that it's just impossible. Couldn't possibly happen. So when cooking for others, remember the fact that some of the alcohol does remain could be a significant concern to recovering alcoholics, parents of children, and others who might have some ethical or religious reason to avoid alcohol. And that is something you should know. And finally today on the podcast, what makes a person creepy? It's a question you kind of intuitively know the answer to, but probably not one you think about very often. But there's actually some research that looked into what makes someone a creep. Over 1,300 people were surveyed, and it's widely believed that if you're a clown, a taxidermist, a sex shop owner, or a funeral director, pretty much people are going to think you're a creep, I guess, until you prove otherwise. There are also some behaviors and nonverbal cues that make someone come across as creepier. Being extremely thin sends that signal. Not looking you in the eye does as well. When people ask to take a picture of you and you don't know them, you're going to think they're a creep. Watching people before interacting with them tends to make people creepy. When someone asks details about your personal life when you don't know them, that's a pretty clear signal. That's just really creepy. Displaying too much or too little emotion makes someone creepy. Being older makes a person creepier, and well, that's kind of age discrimination. But I guess when you're young, people who are very old and look very old can sometimes kind of freak people out or creep people out. And steering the conversation towards sex will pretty much give you the brand of being a creep. And the last question that people in the survey had to answer, and remember this was 1,300 people who were surveyed, do most creepy people know that they're creepy? And 60% said no, which means there's an awful lot of creepy people walking around who have no idea how creepy they are. And that is something you should know. Hi, welcome to Something You Should Know. If you have school-aged children, as I do, maybe this has happened to you as it has happened to me, or they come home and they have a paper to write or a project to do, and somewhere in the instructions from the teacher is, but you can't use Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not a good source to use for this particular paper or project. And I've always thought, well, why is that? What is it, because Wikipedia is so inaccurate or so unreliable that it's not a good source? Or is it because Wikipedia is so good, it's so accurate, that if you use Wikipedia, well, there's your paper, there's your project, all done. So I did a little research, and it turns out that Wikipedia is pretty accurate. They have software that can detect what are called acts of article vandalism, which is where people go in and deliberately mess up or try to delete content from an article. Errors like that are fixed anywhere from between a few minutes to several hours. There have been several studies made to confirm the accuracy of Wikipedia, and overall, it gets very high marks. There are over 73,000 active Wikipedia editors, and there are over 1.8 edits done per second on Wikipedia, performed by those editors who are all over the world. Currently, the English version of Wikipedia includes 5,967,980 articles or so, and it averages 589 new articles per day. 500 million people use Wikipedia in a month, viewing 18 billion total monthly page views. And that is something you should know. Are you legally obligated to buy something that you break in a store? Not necessarily, even if the store has a sign that says so. There's no statute on the books declaring that if you break it, you buy it anywhere in the United States. When a store displays a sign with that rule, it's considered a unilateral contract. That's a contract proposed by one party, but not necessarily agreed on by the other party. That would be you. If you've broken something while shopping, there are a few things you would need to consider before you would have to pay. First of all, the store can't hold you hostage and make you pay before you leave. It's a civil matter. They would have to sue you in court unless you want to voluntarily pay for what you broke. Did you act negligently? If you were juggling the fine china, well, a court might likely hold you liable for those damages. But if the store did not take reasonable steps to prevent breakage of something of value, you might be off the hook. If you are found at fault for the breakage, you would most likely be responsible for the wholesale, not the retail price of the item. And that is something you should know.